What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going over something you guys have been asking for a lot lately. I have done video setups on my A7R III, but today we're going to go through, I'm going to factory reset my A7R IV here. I have my Ninja recorder to go through the menus and film everything, and I'm going to set it up as if it was straight out of the box so you guys can see how I have my camera set up. This is going to be a little bit of a longer one, so I'll put timestamps in so you can see every menu and every item for yourself if you need to go back and replay something. But like I said, it's going to be a little bit long, so get a drink, sit back and relax. Let's go through and set up your Sony A7R IVs. A lot of this stuff will also apply to the older generation cameras and the A9 Mark II and A7S III, so you know, a lot of it will cross over, but this is mostly for the A7R IV. Before we get into this, I just want to give a shout out to Photo Gear here in Auckland. I bought this Zoom H5 recorder, so this is my new setup. So all the audio you're hearing is coming out of the Zoom H6, sorry, not H5, from the Rode NTG USB. Before we get into it, I just want to let you guys know, make sure you check the comments or the description for any updates or corrections I've made, because I've literally just gone through and set this up. I haven't scripted anything, so if I've need to correct myself, that'll be in the comments or in the description. So check those out as well, just to make sure before you start watching this video. Anyway, let's get on with it. Okay, so I've gone in the menu and I've done a factory reset. It wouldn't let me record that for some reason, but everything is straight out of the camera as if you had just taken it out of the box and put a battery in it. So the first thing we're going to do is go in and change the file format to RAW. I don't shoot RAW in JPEG or anything like that. It's just not something I do. If you're going to use my presets or anything like that, you're going to have to shoot RAW anyway, and I'm assuming if you're on the A7R IV, you're going to want to shoot RAW as default. So let's go through RAW file type. I'm going to leave that on compressed. The files are just far too large for uncompressed, and there's really not that much difference in terms of image quality. I would go as far to say is that most people wouldn't even be able to find a difference unless you've really screwed up an image and you're trying to pull it right back. So moving on, we've got JPEG quality and image size. That doesn't matter, it's irrelevant for RAW files. We're going to leave APS-C Super 35 mode in auto because I'm going to set that to a custom button, so we'll get into that soon. Next menu. So long exposure noise reduction, you want to turn that off, because every time you take, say you take a 30-second exposure, you're going to have to wait another 30 seconds for the camera to process the noise reduction, and it's just easier doing it in post anyway. Color space, I leave an sRGB. I've done a whole bunch of tests a long time ago to see if I could tell the difference between sRGB and Adobe RGB, but I couldn't, so I just leave it in sRGB. Lens comp, I turn shading off. Chromatic aberration off. Distortion I leave on auto. It's not letting me change it for this one, but it just is a little bit less distracting if my lens has distortion. It fixes it in camera for most lenses, so I leave that on anyway. Drive mode, we'll get into that soon, but that's just basically all these. I leave mine on mid, but it really depends on the situation. If they're walking back up the aisle like a bride and groom, if you guys don't know, I'm a wedding photographer. If you're walking back up the aisle, I usually put it on high just to burst off a couple of moments there. I'm not going to go over bracket settings or interval shooting or pixel shift or anything like that. If you guys want to know about that, I'll put it in a separate video because it gets a little bit lengthy and it's not really necessary for, you know, what we're doing. Memory, we're going to come back to that. Right now I have the camera in aperture priority, which is important. And we're going to change everything and then come back and save it to custom 1, 2, and 3. Focus mode, I do change a couple of things in here, so I never have it on AFA, I always have it on AFC or manual focus depending on the situation, but usually AFC. And I change AFC priority set to release. AFS, I'm going to change that to AF. Now AFC, I have it on release because I find there's a little bit of a delay when you press the shutter if you have it on balanced emphasis sometimes, because it's just the camera kind of double checking if everything's in focus, which sounds like a great idea, but it doesn't always work out that way, and I just find it much more accurate and faster if it's in release, and I never have any images out of focus anyway. Focus area, this is a little bit of a tricky one, but I have a whole setup for focus system video just on the focus areas and focus systems in Sony, so I'll put the link up here so you guys can see that. Focus area I leave in tracking flexible spot S, so the only A7R IV and A9 Mark II, a couple other cameras as well have it, but that just gives me the little flexible spot there so I can hold it, and then it's just going to track whatever I want it to be set on. So I leave it on tracking flexible spot S. Focus settings just means you can sort of go through and change your focus area, but we're going to change that to a custom button as well. Focus area limit just enables you to disable a whole bunch of different items if you don't want to go through. I haven't disabled any in my setup, but I probably should, and you can go ahead and do that, but I don't really see the point. Switch VHAF area. This just means, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, but when you are in landscape and you have your focus point sort of off in the edge, it means you can turn your camera to horizontal and it's going to shift that focus point to the same side, so you can sort of keep up with what you're doing there. I leave that off because I find it a little bit distracting when it's moving around, but that's up to you guys. Have a play with it and see how you like it. AF illuminator, I turn that off because it's just annoying and I find it doesn't really work that well anyway. Now, face eye AF settings. This is one that a lot of people ask me about, and this face eye frame display menu is off by default, which is really weird, but if you turn that on, that's what gives you the squares around. I wonder if you can see it on my Ninja. Yeah, see, it's got the square box around my face. So that face eye frame display turns that on so you can see the gray box. That's the best way to do that. Right or left eye, I just leave that on auto, and subject is where you can go in and change it to animal, but I never do that, so I just leave it on people, humans. AF tracking sensitivity, I leave this on standard. I find it's the best go-to setting. Some of you guys are going to find different options, but I find if you put it on responsive, which I have to admit, that's what I used to do straight out of the box, and I found that it would just lose targets too quick. So having it on standard gives me a good balance of locked on to the subject, and you know, it's fast enough to track. Aperture drive and AF, I just leave that as standard, and I use back button focus. I've also done a video on that, link up here if you want to see it, but I'm going to turn that off because I use back button focus. Pre-AF, you want to turn that off because it's just annoying and wastes more battery, but it's off by default now, so that's good to see. Focus frame color, thank you Sony for putting this in. I turn that to red, so that just, like it says, changes the focus dot to red, so you can see everything way more clearly than when it was black. You can see if the focus point was black, it would be pretty dark right now. AF area auto clear, I just leave that off. I don't change anything here, but some people get a little bit confused with this phase detect area, like it changes the focus settings or something, but it doesn't. So if you see here, let me get rid of all this info. There's no boxes or anything like that on the screen, but if I go in and turn that on, it's just showing the frame lines on the edge, which is where the phase detect area focus points stop with the A7R III. So if you go right to the edge, after about here is when your focus performance is going to start dropping off with the A7R4. That's the main difference between the focus systems with the A9 and the A7 III, is the phase detect points go right to the edge, but I can't move my focus point anyway that far, so it's really only one point across, really not a big deal. Center focus circulation of focus point, this just means if I turn it on, you can go in and it's going to go right round to the other side, like so, instead of stopping and hitting that wall. I don't like that, so I'm just going to turn that off. ISO settings is a really good one to remember. So when you're shooting aperture priority, you want to use auto ISO and change the minimum and maximum limit to what you want to use. I set my maximum to 8,000, and if I need to go up from there, I can change it whenever I like. But this ISO auto minimum shutter speed is really what you have to change. So a lot of people forget this, and your shutter speed just drops too low and you start getting blurry images, and people message me all the time not understanding why. So you want to go in and change this to, I changed it to 2/50th of a second, that's up to you guys. Now what this means is your ISO is going to stay as low as possible until it gets to 2/50th of a second. So say it goes up to 8,000, which is the limit that I've set. After that, if it gets darker, then my shutter speed is going to start dropping, so I need to keep an eye on it. But yeah, that just sets the lower limit of your shutter speed until it gets to the max ISO that you've set. Metering mode, I just have that set on multi. None of the other ones really work for me. I do have this phase priority set to on, so that just changes the exposure a little bit if I'm using face eye focus or face focus. AEL with shutter, I turn this off, so that just means if you have it on, for example, when you half press the shutter, even when you're using back button focus, you half press the shutter and it's just going to lock your exposure. I find it's not really useful for me, so I turn that off. I just want the camera to keep adjusting when I'm moving the frame around. Flash mode I just leave on fill flash. I'm going to do a settings video on flash. You guys have asked for it. I just posted a couple of photos on my Instagram. At the last wedding I used flash a whole lot, so I'm going to make a video about that and go over my flash settings as well. Exposure comp, I just want to set that to ambient, not that it's really anything I'm going to use, because when I'm using flash I'm always using manual anyway. And white balance I usually have it set to auto unless it's kind of freaking out and I don't like it, then I'll set it manually. But yeah, I generally just leave it on auto. So the other reason I'll use manual is if I'm doing hybrid like photo and video at the same time and I don't want the white balance changing all over the place in the middle of a scene. So in that case I'll leave it in manual. Priority set in auto white balance. This is where you can change it to a different kind of tone white balance, I guess. So lean more towards ambient light or lean more towards a white balance. I used to have it on white with my A7RIVs and I just found it wasn't super accurate, so I just leave it on standard now and I get pretty good results. Dynamic range optimizer, this is one you have to turn off. So I've made a video about this. I'll link this up here as well, so go check that out. There it's like 10 settings that are really important to change or something. So yeah, go check that out. But what it does if you're shooting RAW and you're using DRO, when you take an image, it looks fine in camera, and then when you bring it into Lightroom, it just goes really dark because it's kind of optimizing the JPEG preview in camera, but it doesn't stick to the RAW file. So it's really important to turn it off if you're shooting RAW. Creative styles I don't use. Sometimes I use black and white if the colors are kind of freaking me out and I just want to concentrate on like light and shadow, then I'll switch it to black and white. But again, it doesn't stick to RAW, it's only what you're seeing in the camera anyway. Picture profiles, I am going to make a separate video on picture profiles because it's a little bit involved. I have made one already, but I haven't updated one. But usually if I'm doing hybrid, I don't use picture profiles at all. If I'm shooting video only or my YouTube videos, like this one for example, I can show you I use S-Log2. So I go down to PP7. Oh, it's already set up how I like it. Sometimes, yeah, it is. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, I use S-Log2 and Pro Color. I find that gets me the best file to work with. So yeah, shutter auto white balance lock, that's the same half press and it will lock the white balance if you're using auto white balance. I just leave that off as well. Although thinking about this is a new feature in this camera, I never had it with my R3, so I haven't experimented with it. So maybe I'll try that, but I don't find it shifts that much anyway, so I'll leave that off for now. We're not going to change, we're going to go down to peaking assist. I'm going to put that on mid, leave that on mid and change it to red. So I leave it on off, but when I set my camera to manual focus, it automatically goes to red and mid, so I don't have to go into the menu and change anything. Manual focus assist, I leave that on, so that's just if you're in manual and you turn the focus ring on your lens, it's going to zoom in to that magnified point and make it really easy to focus as well. Anti-flicker shoot, I leave that off. You can try it for yourself. Again, it's one of those things that adds a little bit of delay, and if you're in a room that has really bad lighting or something like that, it's not like it stops banding or anything like that. But yeah, I just leave it off because it adds a delay and doesn't really change what I want to shoot anyway. You know, I'm in a wedding. If I want to get a moment, I have to get it, and if the color's a little bit bad because of flickering lights, I just have to deal with that later. Face registration, I don't use that at all. This just means you can go into your camera and actually register a face. So you can take a photo of like the bride and groom and register their face in camera, and then it's going to prioritize their faces over anybody else's if you're in like a group of people or something like that. But yeah, bit fiddly, not something I like to use. All right, on to video settings. So when I'm shooting hybrid, I just leave it exactly how it is right now. So XAV, CSHD, and 50p. 50 meg. So that just gives me a good balance of slow-mo, and I don't have to use it when I don't need it, so I just leave it on that. Usually at sunset I'll change it to 100p 100 meg just to get that real creamy slow-mo, but yeah. AF drive speed, I leave that on normal and I change tracking sensitivity to responsive. So drive speed, this is all related to video. Drive speed is how fast it's going to get from one point to the other, and tracking sensitivity is just how fast it's going to initiate that change when you move the camera. So that's why I leave it on. Auto slow shutter, leave that on. Audio recording on, obviously. Nothing's changing in here. Marker display, sometimes I'll use this and I'll go to aspect ratio and change that to 235:1. So that just gives me those frame lines if I go into video mode, and you can't see it on the camera. So probably because I'm in recording the external recorder, but yeah, that just gives you the bars sort of top and bottom, so you can see what you're recording and frame it up if you're going to put those black bars in your videos later on. But I'm not often doing that these days. I tend to just export it at 16:9, but that's going to come down to what you guys want to do as well. Movie with shutter, I leave that off. Electronic front curtain, this is also in the settings video which I put up here before. I leave it on because I find I prefer it, I prefer the noise to be lower. If you turn it off, it just means you get two kind of shutter sounds, the front curtain and the back curtain, both mechanical. Now a lot of people will tell you if you leave the electronic front curtain shutter on, you're going to get a little bit of change in depth of field, but it's, that is true kind of, but I tested it side by side with almost all of my lenses, and it's so hard to tell the difference. It's only in real certain situations. It's when your lens is really wide open, and it's just really not a big deal. For me, the silence is better. You guys try it out for yourself. Manny Ortiz did a cool video on it, and I've also done a video on it. But yeah, look up electronic curtain if you want to see how it changes the depth of field. But it's like 0.5% difference in my mind. You can't really tell. Moving on. Release without card, always turn this off. So that's just going to mean if you're going ahead to a wedding and you haven't put any memory cards in, if you go and press your shutter, it's going to keep firing anyway. It'll probably tell you don't have a memory card in, I don't know. But if you disable that, it just means when you press the shutter, it's going to tell you there's no memory card in there. So you can go ahead and put one on. Steady shoot, obviously I'm leaving that on. The only time I go into the settings menu is to change the focal length if I'm using a manual lens like a Viltrox, or I have a couple of lenses that I've been using lately, and you can set the millimeter to the lens that you're using. Good for old film lenses and stuff like that. Zoom setting, I don't use that at all. Display button just lets you change what you see in the viewfinder and on the display. The only thing I turn off is this one here for viewfinder, and in the viewfinder I just leave it like that. Finder frame rate, this is in one of those settings as well, but I leave it on standard. High, it makes the FPS in the viewfinder faster, but makes the actual viewfinder it lowers the resolution a little bit, so I prefer it to be sharper, so I leave it in standard. Zebra settings I don't use, I just find them annoying and inaccurate. Grid lines, sometimes I have the rule of thirds one on. Again, you can't see that probably unless I go back to aperture. Yeah, you can't see these obviously, but grid lines, quite often I'll have it in square grid. That just gives me some lines to, if I'm trying to line up a horizon or a brick wall or something, I can have that on. But that's totally personal preference, up to you guys as well. I don't change anything here. Make sure auto review is off. Custom keys, this is where it gets interesting. So let's just start from scratch. Rear dial, I don't change that to anything because it's just too easy to change by mistake. AEL hold, the AEL button, I set that to eye focus. AF on is AF on, I leave that. Focus mode, yep, I leave that. So that just means if I press C3, it's going to take me into this menu, so I can quickly change to manual focus. Like this 55mm doesn't have a switch on the side, so I leave that on there. Touch operation, I definitely leave that there. So if I press the delete button, it just allows me to turn touch operation on and off. I usually have it off because my big nose changes where the focus point is when I'm holding it up to my face. Focus standard, I leave where it is, so that just, when you press in on the focus joystick, it brings that focus point back to the middle. Center button, I change this to AF area, focus area. So now when I press that center button, it just lets me go back to, changing those fixable spot focusing and all that. Really, the only time I do it is like zone. If I'm on a dance floor, sometimes I'll use zone area focusing. It just picks up a lot more in low light. But yeah. Drive mode, ISO, I leave those like that. Now the bottom button, the down button, I changed that to focus assist, which is here, focus magnifier. So now when I go in, I press down on the D-pad. Oh, it's not letting me do it because I'm in manual. Change that to manual focus. So now when I press down, it lets me zoom in so I can set my focus. And white balance I leave there, and focus area, we changed that, so I'm going to go and change that to APS-C full frame select. So this means I can just hit C2 and it automatically goes into crop mode, Super 35 mode. So I'm instantly getting, it changes my 55mm to like a 130mm or something, changes my 24mm lens to a 35mm lens. So it effectively doubles the lenses you have, gives you a smaller file size, and yeah, it's just a really awesome feature of the A7R IV and the A7R III. You can do it on the A7 Mark III, but you're really lowering your megapixels by then to like 8 or something, so I don't know if you want to do that, but that's up to you guys. Now in video custom keys, the only thing I change is AEL, and I go into AF and change it to focus hold. So when I'm doing video, I can and I focus on a subject, I can hold AEL and then recompose, and it's not going to lose that subject tracking or anything like that. So that's really a handy thing to have. Function menu settings, these are really personal, so you guys can just change them to whatever you like. But yeah, this just changes what happens when you press the function menu on the bottom of your camera, and you can just set up whatever you want to have set in there. Like quick actions to get to. I don't change anything in these other than airplane mode, which I turn on because it saves a little bit of battery life. Can skip through all these. Monitor and viewfinder brightness, I usually just have those set to 0, not auto or anything like that. Sometimes if I'm outside and it's real sunny, I'll change the monitor brightness and the viewfinder to like +1, but I don't go any higher than that. Display quality, I changed that to high. Power save start time, I changed this to 5 minutes because if you have your camera down by your side, it just takes a little bit long to wake up if it goes to sleep. Auto power off temp, I have that set to high because I don't want the camera turning off if it gets a little bit warm. I've never even had the warning with these cameras, so I don't think there's an overheating problem at all. That's with photo and video, so that's really good to see also. NTSC or PAL, I just leave mine out of the box, so that gives me 25p, 50p and 100p. If you change it to the American standard, it's going to give you 60p and 120p. I have honestly no reason to why I do that. I just do it, and I've never changed it, so it's just why I do it. That's going to be totally up to you guys what you want to do. Cleaning mode is a really good thing, so if you want to do your sensor cleaning manually, you can go in, set it to cleaning mode, and then it's just going to lock your sensor up so you can use the swabs to clean it without it moving around because of the sensor stabilization. Really important thing to do. Touch operation, like I said, I have that off, but it's on the quick select button. I turn write serial number to on. This is a really great feature which is in the R4s as well. It just means in Lightroom it's going to write the serial number to all the photos, so I can go and separate them. I can do that anyway because I changed the file names, but it's just a really good thing to have if you want to separate your cameras, and maybe if you're syncing the times in Lightroom or something. Record media settings, this is an important one, so I changed record mode to simultaneous photo. I don't shoot video to both. Maybe I'll change that, but I need to upgrade still some of my cards to the UHS 2 ones. So I'll maybe look at that in the future, but you can change it to record video and photo to both card slots. And I think it would be fine, honestly, with this camera. But yeah, I'm just going to leave it on simultaneous photo and auto switch media off. File folder, this is where I go in and I change the name of the files. So I go CT1 for camera 1 and CT2 for camera 2, and that just changes the actual file name so I can see which camera I was using for each photo. Folder names, I don't move any of that stuff, I just leave that how it is. Another great thing added with the A7R4s is you can change the file names for video now, which you couldn't do beforehand. So I leave that on series and change it to title, and then you can go across and change the title name again to, I have it just to the same as what my other, the photo naming was. So CT1, there we go. Oh, actually I'm going to put a dash in there as well, like that. There we go, so it just separates the number and the camera. And that's pretty much it, guys. So you can go through and change your My menu. So that just adds, and you can go through and add any features that you want, anything that you really go to all the time in your camera, and change that into your My menu settings. So it's just much easier to get to. Right, so now the other thing I want to go over is the custom 1 and 2 and 3 function buttons here. So now everything we've saved into this camera now, I'm going to go and save it to memory. So we're going to go memory, and I have aperture priority set to 1, so click 1. So now when I go and change it to 1 on that dial there, it's just going to put it into aperture priority, and all those custom settings and everything that I had saved is going to go back to that. So the next thing I do now is go back and put it into manual, and then because nothing else is changing, the only thing I'm going to change is the ISO, and I'm just going to set that to 400 because it's just a good starting point. And then I'm going to go memory and save that into memory number 2. So now if I want to go and use all those settings and go between aperture priority and manual, all I have to do is go between the function 1 and 2 buttons on the side there. Now function menu 3 I have set up to video, like S-Log and all those kind of profiles, but I don't use it for hybrid shooting anymore because changing from 1 to 3 on the dial and then waiting for it to load and pressing record just takes a little bit too long for me. But yeah, 1 I have set to aperture priority and 2 I have set to manual. The other reason I do that is because I might go into the camera and change something for just some random shoot, and I might forget to change it back. So everything is saved in that 1 and 2. So when I go to a wedding I can just change it and I know it's all set. The only thing it doesn't save is the record media settings, where it changes the backup to each cards. So keep an eye on that. If you change it, it's not going to save to the 1 and 2 or 3 function menus. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Drop a comment below if this video helped you guys out, and I'll see you in the next one.